Good morning to everyone.
Good morning.
Well, while we're here discussing what kind of relationship Ukraine and Russia have, and let's just say there isn't any relationship at all. The whole world is affected by the relationship between Donald Trump as the President of the United States and Iran. And here, it seems to me, things are much worse than in the relationship between Russia and Ukraine. Because this affects the entire global market, the economy, you and me, and basically everything that can possibly be affected. Well, let's get started and see what's happening here. Donald Trump announced a deal with Iran and named the signing date. One could be glad and say, on the contrary, this is a good thing. Finally, Donald Trump has achieved at least some kind of peace. Well, he has already, 7 times, yes, played the dove of peace.
A little digression.
And so, in general, it didn't happen because something was always getting in the way. The victories he announced turned out to be,
Victories like this one. Digression. Those victories...
The ones he announced turned out to be so-called victories like our UTU, as Ukrainians say. And then the thing goes on. Donald Trump even named the signing date, and according to him, right after the signing, the Strait of Hormuz will be opened for everyone. Can you imagine? Trump called the future agreement the complete opposite of the 2015 nuclear deal which was made under Barack Obama's administration. He described his version as a wall leading to the absence of nuclear weapons. Well, we've already heard about the wall many times, and we've also heard about the steel porcupine many times. Somehow, the metaphors and epithets used by powerful leaders of different countries aren't very different. Why is that, I wonder? Maybe there's a certain set of words you can use to construct phrases and build sentences and even formulate entire texts that show how powerful this ruler is who has power, money, and opportunities to solve certain problems, but you don't actually solve any problems because, come on. And of course, talking is easier than actually doing something. And Trump says actually they don't want nuclear weapons anymore and they won't get them, neither by buying, nor by developing, nor by any other means. And immediately Ukrainian experts come to mind, some of those whom I portrayed and showed. Actually, they're not experts, just some idle representatives of the Ukrainian political elite. And they said that creating nuclear weapons is actually a piece of cake. Yeah, well, nuclear weapons just like that and you already have it in your pocket. Well, of course, it would be better not to have it in your pocket. But they have the feeling that it's somewhere right there in their pocket. Closer to home, closer to the point, and in the end, nothing actually happens because, it all looks very strange. At the same time, Trump says the following that separately, so where is it? According to the President of the United States, nuclear material will be melted down and destroyed, whether it's in Iran or in the US. Well, it would be interesting to see the melting, of course, of that very uranium and the furnaces that can do it. But I'm sure there's some kind of processing mechanism, and that's what's meant here. The most interesting thing is not even that Trump announced another peace deal with Iran, but that this has been announced for the 37th time already. Not the second, not the third, but really the 37th time. There are people who take Trump's statement seriously and analyze it, but I'm not one of them. I mean, analysis, yes, but some kind of deep, thorough, even digital analysis, no, because you could just go crazy doing that. If you try to count how much and what every politician has promised, well, that's just opening the gates of hell and there's nothing you can do about it because politicians promise something new every day. Keeping track of all that, you'd have to be some kind of genius. Here, it says that the signing of the agreement between the US and Iran is scheduled for June 14th. And the US representative, the leader, indicated that immediately after it is signed, the Strait of Hormuz will be open to everyone. And it's not entirely clear here whether it will be open for money, for a fee, or without a fee. Who will be sending all this? Because Iran previously presented a list of issues that were agreed upon, according to Iran itself. And it consisted of 14 points, among which were the unfreezing of Iran's assets, non-interference by the US in Iran's affairs, and the withdrawal of US and NATO forces from areas near Iran, and possibly even the payment of reparations. That would certainly be interesting. And also the unblocking of the Hormuz Strait, although it's not entirely clear whether they will actually pay $2 million for each barge that passes through the strait, or if they won't pay anything at all. Because Iran says that the situation with the logistics chains or the throughput capacity of the Hormuz Strait will be restored, returned, more precisely to the time when there was still no war between Iran and the US. But again, okay, they'll unblock it, but who is going to foot the bill for all this? But here a lot of questions arise, and you and I will wait for answers to them. Maybe, of course, the Ministry of Rhetorical Questions will help. The Ministry of Ukraine. Golden Mountains, Milky Rivers, Rigs. Somehow. I doubt it. So far, we are still waiting for answers since 2022, and this ministry doesn't respond at all. By the way, this is just sarcasm, of course. There is no such ministry. Or did you suddenly think that something like this might actually appear? CNN claims that Trump announced an imminent deal with Iran 37 times, but never actually made it. So I think oil prices went up and down 37 times, and that's just wonderful. Who knows when another speech will be made? One can rule the world, so to speak, with their own wallet, that's right. Taking into account the period before the truce was signed, he did this at least 37 times. That's how many times he explicitly stated it in social media posts, public speeches, and phone conversations with media representatives. That the deal is close to being finalized, or that Iran is desperately seeking to conclude it. At this point, it's not entirely clear who is actually desperate to finalize this deal. Because, well, according to some experts, Europe also has a lot of demands, as do China and many other countries, and the US, by the way, as well. Because again, the supply chains run through the Strait of Hormuz, and quickly restructuring them is simply impossible. And on top of that, there's also the internet backbone, which Iran had previously threatened. And no Elon Musk with his SpaceX will save the situation. Because now the traffic volumes are so large that the bandwidth of SpaceX's low Earth orbit satellites simply won't be enough. That's why we need to approach all of this with great caution. And also, Trump announced better relations between the US and Iran, but he says that Barack Obama is bad, Trump is good, and that's why the relations between the US and Iran are also good. And according to him, the US opened a direct path for Iran to create and use a nuclear bomb 6 years ago, and it was Barack Obama's fault. In turn, his agreement, which is supposed to be signed on June 14 Trump, called it the complete opposite and an absolute obstacle to Iran obtaining nuclear weapons. Well, to be honest, I don't really know what they were trying to achieve there. How were they trying to achieve it? Well, Iran hasn't spoken yet, but there are already protests by dissatisfied citizens on the streets of Iran. And that very Iranian foreign minister is being called a not-so-good person, a jerk. So they are planning to have a heart-to-heart talk with him, a real heart-to-heart, as soon as they get to the Iranian prime minister himself. I don't know how true this is, but today there were news reports and they showed videos and all sorts of things are happening there, really. But as for us, Trump emphasizes that the deal between the US and Iran does not involve transferring any funds to Tehran. Unlike Obama's payment, which included $1.7 billion in cash, there will be no transfer of money. This immediately raises questions. What is this unfreezing of funds that supposedly won't happen? Although Iran has been notified otherwise, and well, again, it's unclear what's going on. Iran has already stated that the conditions are not right at all, and that it was pointless to make any agreements in the first place. And anyway, now we'll send Bimbu, and we'll talk there once she lands. So, these are the kinds of strange things going on between these countries, but let's hope that Biden knows what he's doing. Do you believe that? Write in the comments. And what else do we have here? The US not only has a delicate relationship with Iran, but they're also distancing themselves from Europe. And this is official policy. This is Trump, which is draining Europe. Draining whom? The wallets of taxpayers, Europeans, and draining souls, because... well, how can you even live without Trump in your soul? Tell me, dear viewers, isn't this just crazy? But here we have something that breaks the heart of one Zelensky somewhere in the world. The Pentagon refused to sell Germany long-range Tomahawk missiles. At first glance, this looks like a concern about escalation, but in reality, there's a much more troubling logic here. This is a continuation of steps that have been ongoing for weeks. Washington decided to withdraw 5,000 troops from Germany, halted the deployment of a battalion with Tomahawk missiles, and sharply reduced the planned deliveries of bombers, fighters, as well as destroyers and submarines. for reinforcement. NATO's momentum, this very NATO is constantly getting stronger, but as we can see, nothing good usually comes of it. Then, I think some Latvians or Lithuanians drowned in some swamps during exercises, and now they've lost several armored personnel carriers. I think they went somewhere and never came back, and it's absolutely impossible to figure out where to look for them. But NATO is dealing with this, no doubt, the greatest socio-economic union in the form of this very NATO. And of course, militarily as well, it simply can't lose there. All of this will be supported for many, many years to come. The Pentagon says this is necessary to balance Europe's and the US's contributions to the continent's defense, but there are representatives who see things differently. In Washington, they say not only are they removing their own precision strike systems from Europe, but they're also not allowing their allies to arm themselves. Because they're afraid of Russia's reaction, and as a result, the US is deliberately separating its own security from that of the Europeans. That's what the author of this very column in Politico is arguing. But Politico often writes interesting things. Of course, our opinion may differ from the authors, but nevertheless, it deserves attention. Moreover, the commander of the NATO joint forces in Europe, Alexis Grinkovich, called the alliance's excessive dependence on the US an unhealthy dependence. And here again, Ursula von der Leyen immediately comes to mind, who looked at Trump the way I recommend all your favorite girls look at you, one after another, together, or however you like, even if you have only one girl. If you don't have one, then look at yourself in the mirror. But basically, just like Ursula von der Leyen looked at Trump during that very meeting of theirs, the infamous one, where she promised, I think, 850 billion euros to spend on oil products provided by the US. And also some dozens or even hundreds of billions of euros more on other things that Trump provides, namely on consumer goods that come from the US. At the same time, the US is raising tariffs on European goods by up to 15%, and in my opinion, it's wonderful. If you're respected and obeyed without question like that, then go ahead, raise taxes, raise tariffs, and everything will be great. Of course not, that's sarcasm. So, we are also being told that Europe is no longer dependent on the US, and the topic of a split is not new for transatlantic relations. Such doubts first arose in the 1950s when the USSR was able to strike directly at US territory. And then in the mid-70s, after the Soviet SS-20 missiles were deployed, they could reach all of Europe, but not America. But now there are other missiles that can reach both Europe and America, and in general they can reach anywhere. So it's strange. And when Europe can defend itself and even asks to buy American weapons, the answer is no. Well, says Donald Trump, defend yourselves. And in this case, that's probably right, because they've already defended one country. I think you know which one. Here Magyar also announced a historic agreement with Ukraine, and there's a lot of interesting stuff here. Magyar, that's him, he's the Prime Minister of Hungary, and he replaced that very representative, the one who had not very friendly relations with Ukraine. And this one also doesn't have friendly relations. But in short, something unclear is happening. He stated the following: a historic agreement between Hungary and Ukraine on the educational, cultural, linguistic, and political rights of the Hungarian community in Zakarpattia has come into force. And there are quite a lot of points in it. Some of them say that Hungarian will be taught in schools, that signs, bas-reliefs, and street names will be translated into Hungarian. In short, there are a lot of preferential treatment for the Hungarian language. And naturally, Magyar is happy about it but in Zakarpattia, where all of this will mostly be seen, it will happen gradually. Hungarian dash, as they say, westernization. Yes, this is Hungary, Hungarization, Hungarianization. In general, write the correct adjective for the noun of this word, and I will gladly repeat it when the time is right in one of the broadcasts. Because you say it yourself, it's not capable. Well, and Magyar boasted that in just a few weeks he was able to solve a problem that Orban couldn't solve for several years or even 10 years. But I also think it's great. If a person is so confident in his abilities, that's a good thing. At the same time, earlier the head of Hungary's foreign ministry, Onitu Orba, called the concessions from Ukraine services, after which Budapest unblocked its accession to the EU. And there, by the way, there's a lot said about Hungarians, their language, and minorities. It's extremely interesting to read. I recommend it to everyone. It's fascinating bedtime reading. As for Hungary demanding something there, that's actually true. And now, some jingoistic Ukrainian organizations are starting to demand that this never happens. And here we go again. I mean, no streets were renamed. A female user of the channel reached out to me, and I'm very grateful to her for bringing up this issue. And she says the following, that they are being asked, so to speak, to make decolonization efforts. We are reaching out to you on behalf of HEOD, Decolonization Ukraine, which in almost a decade of work has managed to dismantle about 800 objects and rename around 10,000 street names related to the colonial past of the Soviet Union. We were able, on a civic and voluntary basis, to teach our fellow citizens to write petitions themselves and demand that the local authorities comply. Obligations to clear Ukrainian places of symbols, images, and monuments that discredit Ukrainian memory. Well, so everyone has already been defeated. Now all that's left is to fight what's written on the fences, to fight open windows from which Russian music is playing, and there are civic activists who seem to be Ukrainians, but overall it all seems really strange. An equally strange thing is the opinion, so to speak, of experts about whether Russia will be able to return to real negotiations. Yeah, never, damn it. Well, I'm joking, of course, but demanding this from the locals is pointless. As political analyst Andrei Hromadskik notes, politicians talk about negotiations just to calm people down. But in reality, there's no need to calm them down, because for them, the status quo already suits them just fine. Endorphins are high, there's plenty of adrenaline in their blood, so, well, these are tough times for the locals. Their endorphins are at their peak, and there's plenty of adrenaline in their blood, so... But these are the kinds of difficult tasks. There is no real progress in the negotiations, and there is too little room for compromise. Diplomatic bridges have been burned, the warhawks have prevailed, and therefore everything will go no further than statements which we, dear viewers, have already become extremely accustomed to. Every other person is making some statement. He's the best president, he'll end the war, and he'll even take the VAR army out of this very constitution. Well, in general, the main thing is that he manages to pull out this agreement in time, the agreement, so that nothing bad happens. Well, basically, that's all there is to it. So we see that international relations are sliding into a catastrophic success, simply negative, but nevertheless. And we'll talk about this again a bit later. In the meantime, let's do what? Let's watch and listen to the powerful leaders. Who do we have? Who will represent all of this? Well, I don't even know. Probably this character right here. See?
Let's go in.
I think you all recognized him. This is Zagorodny, the expert on all matters, but our video will be a little different. Not with Zagorodny at all, because there's really no point in considering him for that, but we could take Fidinu instead. I've already shown Fidinu. Okay, let's try something else. Here's the blogger Bobarenko. Let's take a look at the blogger Bobarenko. This time he's without a cup. Usually he has a cup. And the blogger Bobarenko. Without a cup, he spreads all sorts of truths to the masses.
All right, so Putin is funny. We laughed at Putin, that Putin whom Europe is afraid of, but Ukrainians, well, in the person of Zelensky, just spit on that and say, he's actually funny, don't be afraid of him, there's nothing scary there.
Well, yes, Ukrainians are the bravest, the most exempt from mobilization, the ones who are somewhere in Italy and Greece. Don't look at me, I'm not encouraging or calling anyone to war. On the contrary, war is bad, fighting is bad, a bad peace is better than any good quarrel. Those who support this good quarrel can go to war, and those who don't support it can choose not to go. Blogger Bobarenko obviously belongs to those who are not going to war.
We give him slaps, we smack him with bass shoes on the face, and that's pretty much it.
I'm once again surprised by the level of Ukrainian journalism. In Russia, by the way, it's pretty much the same. They take shots at everything there too. And if you look at what Medvedev writes on Twitter, or on X, you just want to grab your head in disbelief.
Europeans aren't scary. Civilization feared them, but after 5 years of fighting, they're the ones suffering, not us.
So that's how it turned out?
Exactly, so...
That you're not doing badly, that's obvious, because every time you look at some blogger who advocates for war, their chewing muscles seem to grow several times larger. They showed one skinny student from the Olympics in 2022, and by 2024 he had turned into a real big student, and this big student starts convincing everyone around him with a set of cliched phrases that everything is great. Everything is fine, Madame Marquise, everything is fine, everything is fine. With that, let me say goodbye to you. Goodbye, everyone.
Dear home front who is watching us, no matter how hard it is, to avoid dealing with the draft office, enlist. If you're unemployed, please do. We've discussed this on air for 5 years. When you're mobilized, it's not just about the front. There are a lot of professions in the military that need you and your participation. Also donate, support, because it's extremely important.
Yes, we will be very grateful, or rather our guys will be very grateful to you. So for me, yes, with an awareness of justice by my own example, and the team is like that, do as I do.